Our reading today is from Dogen. One time, Huan Yang asked a monk, "Do you depend upon practice or enlightenment?" The monk replied, "It's not that there is no practice and no enlightenment. It's just that it's not possible to divide them." Reading from the 13th century Zen master Dogen. Oh, we have so many overwhelming issues in front of us these days, it seems. The ones we mentioned in the opening prayer: the pandemic, refugee crises, authoritarian proliferation, cyber attacks, climate change. It's understandable that the sense of malaise might creep in now and then and lead to a real sense of inadequacy. Sometimes we can just feel so small and ineffective. It's not that, I guess the point is that this wormhole can get depressing very quickly. It seems like it doesn't end. And yet we can look back over history and say, well, but there's nothing particularly new now. This happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis, or that during the assassination of the public figures in the 60s, or 9/11. We can almost go back and say, well, that at that time was also equally stressful. So it's not really the intensity or the quantity of the crises before us. It is, bless you, as always, a matter of awareness, of perception of these events. Oddly, I sat in with a client at a cybersecurity conference this last week, and some very interesting themes emerged, which I thought would help us as metaphysicians. One is that cybersecurity is considered a personal conflict. It's not considered a technological one. So with all the codes and all the counter codes and all the distance and all the stealth, they still look at it as a person-to-person interaction. So that doesn't change. The other, and it's also related to this, is that many of the trends we see in current cybersecurity are actually mimicked, and a guy wrote this book about this, mimicked on the old-fashioned tactics of the KGB and the CIA. They're just the same thing. They're just now in the cyber world. So the tools have shifted from clubs to spears to guns to nukes to now malware. Cybersecurity calls this the 7-step kill chain. And it's from, we don't have to remember this, but it's from recon to delivery, installation, exfiltration, et cetera. But the interesting finally is, after all these years, they're finally going back and they're studying step 1, or 0. Sometimes they call it -1, which is, and always has been, the same. What is the human intent? What is the assailant trying to do way before this kill chain is enacted? And the other interesting thing that's emerging from this is that there tends to be this fear of, oh my gosh, AI will take over, artificial intelligence will run amok. And yet all of these experts say, no, over time, it only can mimic our consciousness. It is built by us. It cannot exceed that. As we grow, it will grow. It doesn't have its own consciousness. It can only mirror us. So what is in effect here is therefore that the only way we can resolve and have more peaceful interactions is to go slowly forward and improve our collective consciousness. It's what everything else is based on. Even what seems like something remote or technological, it still follows us and only us. So our job then is every day to scratch that needle across the vinyl. Just move that little shift in our consciousness. And lately, during all this and some intense days, I go home and I rely on 2 remedies, 2 places that help me rebalance. One, as I mentioned, I've been reading Dogen, and the other is watching Ted Lasso. Now, those of you who may not know, Ted Lasso is a TV series. It's on Apple TV+. But the fascinating thing to me is that they both offer real-world advice for those feelings of inadequacy, of inefficacy. and they guide us on how to grow our consciousness in this day-to-day manner. So I'm only through the first part of Ted Lasso, and quite honestly, the first half of the book that I'm reading. So I will call this Dogen Lasso Season 1. And let's see, next month, I will speak with you again. No promises, but let's see if I make it that far. So let's just gather the lessons so far of Season 1. Right? So some Dogen gems along the way. Listen to this one. Wholeness is the fundamental reality for all beings. Every form of life is an all-inclusive manifestation of what might be called original wholeness. Though we suffer from the ingrained pattern of dualistic thinking that prevents us from knowing our complete and original self. In metaphysical language, we are one with Source. It is just that perception of duality that makes us feel like we are separated. Between aspiration, practice, enlightenment, and nirvana, there is not a moment's gap. The universal theme of timelessness. And as we spoke together in the invitatory, clarity beyond clarity beyond clarity. I love that triple repetition. That was not a typo. That was clarity beyond clarity beyond clarity. So too, Dogen encouraged us to go beyond thinking, what we might call meta thought. We have thoughts, we are not our thoughts, only we go beyond that. And here's one that I find just absolutely profound. We do not sit in order to become enlightened. We sit as an expression of enlightenment. That's just what I did, Reverend Kathy. I went, what? We do not sit in order to become enlightened. We sit as an expression of enlightenment. Meaning we don't meditate to achieve something or to be other than what we are. We sit in meditation because we have a certain awareness already, and it requires us to join the greater good. It's a draw, it's a magnet. It calls us to the void, Brahman, collective consciousness, universal intelligence, the source. And it doesn't mean that we have to sit 20 minutes twice a day, morning and evening, or 3 times on Saturday. And it certainly doesn't mean that the more you sit, the more enlightened you are. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that we're drawn to prayer, to tune in, to reflect, because we already have a sense of something greater than ourselves. And we need to connect with it on purpose. Finally, one more lesson from the highlights of Season 1 of Dogen. This one's slightly longer. If kind speech is offered, little by little, kind speech expands. Thus, even kind speech that is not ordinarily known or seen comes into being. Be willing to practice it for this entire life. Do not give up. World after world, life after life. Those who hear kind speech from you will have a delighted expression and a joyful mind. Those who hear of your kind speech will be deeply touched. They will always remember it. Ponder the fact that kind speech is not just praising the merits of others. It has the power to turn the destiny of a nation. For the second portion, one thing I've noticed from my recent fascination with Ted Lasso is that although it is laced with some really raunchy and vulgar language, so if you're sensitive to that, don't watch it. But the reason I keep watching is that all the main characters speak kindly. Truly. Not at first. There wouldn't be a good plot if they started off like that. And as Dogen would probably say, they suffer from ingrained patterns of dualistic thinking that prevent them from knowing their complete and original self. But eventually, they do speak kindly. In fact, sometimes overly so. The lead character is a nonstop spout of dated white American euphemisms, but a few gems metaphysically trickle through. One, I love a locker room, he says. It smells of potential. And yes, potential is a great part of what we believe as metaphysicians. A character asks him, do you believe in ghosts? And he said, I do. But most importantly, I believe they need to believe in themselves. Affirmations for those who have passed. You beating yourself up is like Woody Allen playing the clarinet. I just don't want to hear it. Against negative thinking. And then this one is like a Zen koan to me. I get it and I don't get it. You shouldn't bring an umbrella to a brainstorm. Yeah, there's a lot of that. The poem in the beginning, in the front of your bulletin is the same. It's the snow makes the mountain. I go, huh? And there's part of us that gets it. And then another part that goes, whoa, that's a koan. I have to think about that. Shouldn't bring an umbrella to a brainstorm. I can already think that's going to be useful at a meeting or two. So I also noticed that the show works metaphysically because the problems are set up early, but they're not lingered upon. They just are. So there's this initial blame, everybody grapples, there's conflict. And then the rest of the episode is about people behaving a little better. They try to scratch that needle across the vinyl. So they teach us there is something we can do. I just learned an interesting term this week. It's called pseudo-inefficacy. I know, pseudo-inefficacy. Inefficacy, what we just spoke about, which is that feeling that you just can't do anything, being very small. And yet the term is pseudo, false. That's incorrect. So when you feel small, the term means you were wrong. There is something you can do. You can make a difference. And I smile at the end of every Ted Lasso episode because he shows me, this program shows me my pseudo-inefficacy. Scott, there's something you can do. It may not be about climate change or the Budget Reconciliation Act or cybersecurity, but I can speak kindly to others. So where do we start? The people right in front of your face. That's where we start. We listen, we lend compassion, we speak kindly to the one right in front of our face. Because there is no other, there's no other time to speak kindly. That's the practice we can do from our individual awareness of enlightenment. One time, Huang asked a monk, do you depend upon practice or enlightenment? And the monk replied, it's not that there's no practice and not that there's no enlightenment. It's that it's impossible to separate. So far, the lesson to remember is that we sit because we are enlightened. And we can practice kind speech. They are inseparable. If I can just remember this, I might make it to season 2. Blessings.